The first thing Ari noticed about the alien was that she was crying. Not weeping. Not the dramatic, heaving kind of crying that people did in dramas to get something from you. Just a slow, steady leak from both eyes. 4 eyes, technically, the upper pair larger and milkier than the lower, as she slumped against the cave wall with her legs folded beneath her in a way no human skeleton could manage. She was the color of old moss, her skin faintly luminescent in the dark, and there was a crack running from her left shoulder to her collarbone that glowed a dim amber like a fault line in cooling lava. Not a wound exactly, a structural fracture, something deeper than flesh. Ari crouched at the cave mouth for a long moment, listening to the drip of water and the alien's breathing, which sounded like wind moving through reeds. She was 11 years old. She had 2 older brothers and a grandmother who smoked a pipe on the front stoop every evening and said things like, "The world doesn't owe you caution." She had been told many times that she was too brave for her own good, which she privately interpreted as a compliment. She stepped inside. The alien raised her head. 3 of the 4 eyes focused on Ari. The 4th seemed to be tracking something further away, something in another room or another world. Her fingers, 6 on each hand, boneless, tapering to filaments, twitched once and went still. "You're hurt," Ari said. She didn't know why she said it in Korean. She suspected the alien didn't speak Korean. But the words came out anyway, matter of fact, the same tone she used when her youngest brother skinned his knee. The alien's mouth, a horizontal slit that ran the width of her lower face, opened. What came out was not language exactly. It was more like the feeling of language, the shape of a sentence pressing against the inside of Ari's skull, carrying something that resolved slowly into meaning. She was not supposed to have survived the landing. Her name, rendered into sound that human lungs could approximate, was something like Lanka. She was, in some untranslatable configuration of the word, a princess. She had been in transit across 17 light years when the Interceptor found her. The Interceptor belonged to something she called, and here Ari felt, rather than heard the concept, the Dominion, a force that moved through the galaxy the way a fire moves through dry grass, quickly, hungrily, leaving a particular kind of silence behind. Lanka had escaped in a damaged pod. She had made for the nearest inhabited system, which happened to be this one. This small warm rock, this unremarkable blue planet that the Dominion hadn't yet gotten around to cataloging as worth burning. Hadn't yet. "Your guardian," Ari said, because she'd caught that thread in the transmission. A figure, green-skinned, armored, who had shielded Lanka's pod with its own body and taken the worst of the impact. "Where is it?" The alien tilted her head in a way that was not quite a nod but functioned like one. "Deeper in the cave." Ari went to find her brothers. Junho was 16 and took everything personally. Daysek was 14 and thought everything was funny until it wasn't. They were sitting on the hillside above the cave eating rice crackers and arguing about whether a particular cloud looked more like a dog or a general when Ari came up through the brush and said, "There's an alien in the cave and she needs help." Junho said, "What?" Daysek said, "Is she scary? She's crying," Ari said. Daysek stood up immediately. He had a long-standing policy of helping anyone who was crying, which had gotten him into trouble before and would undoubtedly do so again. Junho stayed sitting for another 3 seconds. Ari counted, then got up too, because whatever else he was not the kind of person who let his younger sister walk into danger alone. The Guardian was in the back chamber of the cave, behind a curtain of hanging lichen. It was enormous. Nearly 2.5 meters, with a body like layered ceramic plates, the same moss green as Lanka but deeper, more permanent. The crack that ran through Lanka's shoulder ran through the Guardian too, but worse. Multiple fracture lines, the amber glow was almost gone. It lay propped against the wall with the deliberate care of something that had chosen its final position. It was still alive. The 3 of them stood in front of it, and it looked at them, looked through them, maybe, to something only it could see, and then it did something Ari hadn't expected. It laughed. A sound like stone tiles knocking together, brief and warm and utterly genuine. Then it reached out one enormous hand, each finger tipped with a small disc of something that wasn't quite metal, and pressed it against the chest of each of them in turn. Junho first, then Daysek, then Ari. And here it paused, because Ari had braced herself for being skipped, for being excluded the way she always was from the things that mattered. But the Guardian pressed the disc to her chest too, and she felt something move through her like a tuning fork being struck. Whatever it gave them, it gave equally. Lanka watched from the chamber entrance, 4 eyes tracking the process with something that on a human face would have been relief. The Guardian's glow dimmed further after that. Not gone, not yet, but resting. They didn't know what to call what had happened to them, so they didn't call it anything for a while. Junho discovered he could move air, not just feel it, but grip it, compress it, send it outward in focused pulses that could stagger a grown man, or, as he demonstrated rather too enthusiastically in the backyard, reshape the bamboo fence. He spent the first week being insufferable about this, which at least was consistent with his personality. Daysek found he could reshape the ground. Not massively. He wasn't going to be rearranging mountains anytime soon, but he could encourage stone to shift, compel soil to harden or loosen, feel the deep architecture of the earth beneath him the way another person might feel their own pulse. He was predictably delighted by this. Ari's gift was subtler and, she would eventually understand, considerably more powerful. She could feel the interior of things. Not just emotions, she'd always been good at that, but structure. The composition of materials, the stress points in a wall or a machine or a living body, the precise location of a fracture line in an alien guardian's ribcage, the exact threshold at which something would break. There was also, for all three of them, something else. Something harder to name. When they were together and something threatened them, they could transform, snap into configurations their bodies shouldn't be able to hold, suited and armored in a way that wasn't armor exactly, but felt protective in the way that knowing you are not alone feels protective. Junho called it gearing up. Daysek called it going sky mode. Ari called it becoming necessary. Lanka stayed. This surprised them. They'd expected her to leave once she recovered, to get back in her pod, which Dr. Bang Diok from the Technical Institute 3 kilometers away was secretly helping to repair and return to wherever she'd come from. But Lanka moved into the cave as if she'd always lived there and began learning Korean with a speed that was either proof of extraordinary alien intelligence or proof that Korean was somehow deeply intuitive to beings from the Cygnus arm of the galaxy, and made herself at home in a way that felt, after a while, less like a guest and more like a fact. Dr. Bang Diok was the one who'd found them initially, had been hiking the hills for some purpose of his own and seen the impact scar and followed it, and found 4 children sitting with a crashed alien, trying to describe the concept of a hospital. He was 53, rumpled, smelled permanently of solder and instant coffee, and cried with almost no provocation. A sad song, a dead bird on the road, a particularly moving proof. He had repaired Lanka's pod drive twice and then declared it beyond repair. He suspected he would spend the rest of his life in a cave with aliens and gifted children, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he was fine with this. The 4 children and the doctor fell into a rhythm over the weeks that followed. Mornings, Dr. Bang Diok working on the pod, Lanka dictating technical specifications in her pressed language, Ari translating. Afternoons, Junho and Daysek practicing in the hills above the cave, learning the edges of what they could do, occasionally breaking things that needed not to be broken. Evenings, all 5 of them in the cave's lower chamber eating whatever they'd brought, Lanka slowly acquiring the Korean vocabulary for hot, cold, please stop yelling, and more rice crackers. She was particularly precise about the last one. What is the Dominion? Ari asked Lanka one evening, sitting by the cave's lower entrance where you could see the valley and the lights of the town below. Lanka was quiet for a long moment. She had learned to be quiet in the human way, not the alien way, which involved all 4 eyes going distant and the fingers going still, but in the way of someone choosing words. Think of a voice, she said at last, that has spoken for so long it has forgotten that silence existed before it. Ari thought about this. Are they looking for you? Lanka's lower eyes closed. Yes. Will they come here? They are already close. They came on a night of rain, not warships, not yet. The Dominion was methodical. It sent scouts first, advance parties, instruments of disruption, things that could move through a population and not be immediately identified as military. The Hwarang V trio, which was what the children at school had started calling the 3 of them, the name having spread in that unstoppable way that nicknames do, though there were technically 4 of them, a fact everyone seemed to find inconvenient. Learned about this the hard way. The evil circus had been in town for 3 weeks before they understood what it was. It looked legitimate. Tent and lights and the smell of popcorn. A ring with performers who moved with remarkable grace. Animals that seemed slightly wrong in ways you couldn't immediately specify. The children of the town loved it. Parents brought their kids on weekends. Dr. Bang Diok went twice, and both times came home unsettled in a way he couldn't articulate, his hands shaking slightly as he worked, crying into his tools without quite knowing why. On his third visit, he brought a scanner he'd built from cave-salvaged alien components, and sitting in the back row with popcorn he wasn't eating, quietly confirmed what his body had been trying to tell him for 3 weeks. The performers registered on alien biological frequencies. Not all of them. The acrobats and the juggler were human. But the ones in the heavier costumes, the ones who moved differently, those were something else wearing something human on top. He came home and told the children and cried slightly into his instant coffee. Why would they set up a circus? Daesuk asked. Cover, Junho said immediately, in the tone of someone who has watched too many spy dramas. It is a mapping operation, Lanka said. She was standing in the cave entrance, arms folded in the human way she'd adopted, though her fingers still moved occasionally in alien patterns when she was thinking hard. They are surveying the population, learning what you are capable of, how you organize, who you trust. She paused. And they are looking for me. The cave was quiet for a moment. We should go look at the circus, Daesuk said. Lanka disappeared on a Tuesday. They found the cave empty and the pod undisturbed and no note, because Lanka hadn't yet mastered the concept of leaving notes, and the Guardian's amber light was fractionally dimmer, as if the fracture lines had deepened slightly with distress. The circus, Aerie said. Nobody argued. The Dominion's advance agents were, up close, considerably more alarming than a circus tent suggested. The one they called Flyform was 3 meters of iridescent compound eyes and wing cases folded against a body that moved with the boneless fluency of something that had never evolved to move on a single plane. The one in robes, Daisy called it the robe, uncreatively but accurately, had skin the color of dried blood and fingers that ended in what appeared to be sensory organs rather than nails, tasting the air, reading the chemical signatures of fear and location. The one with the lavender hair and white face paint was the most disconcerting because it looked almost human until it smiled, which it did often and too widely. They were interrogating Lanka when the 3 of them arrived. Interrogating is a gentle word for it. Lanka was encased in a crystal structure. Not a prison exactly, more like a compression field made visible, pressing inward from all sides, designed to be uncomfortable in ways that were difficult to articulate, but which all 3 of them felt at a sympathetic resonance through their gifts. She was not injured, she was being diminished, made smaller, made less. A 4th boy, Suchan, who went to school with Daesuk and had the misfortune of having stumbled across the cave 2 weeks ago and knowing too much, was zip-tied to a support pole and looking extremely unhappy about it. There was also a 5th presence in the room, the one they had not expected and could not immediately categorize. A figure seated at the far end of the chamber behind a desk made from crated equipment, wearing what might have been a uniform or might have been a kind of living armor, its surface shifting slightly as it breathed. This was the one Lanka had not described, the one who ranked above the scouts. It had a skull-shaped staff propped against the desk that was not decorative. Kiri could feel the frequency it was designed to broadcast, something disruptive and wide, capable of hitting unshielded nervous systems in a radius she estimated at roughly 40 meters. She noted the estimate and filed it. Junho went straight at Flyform. This was not the plan. There hadn't been a plan. This was Junho at 16 doing what Junho at 16 did, which was make a decision with his body before his brain had finished its analysis. The compressed air pulse he threw was solid enough to stagger even 3 meters of alien biology, and he followed it with another, walking forward into the fight with the particular calm of someone who has already decided they're not stopping. Daesuk went for the robe, which made the mistake of trying to grab him from behind, and discovered that the ground under its feet was no longer reliably solid. It stumbled, then stumbled again, the earth moving in careful, targeted ways around it, never quite falling, but never quite stable. Aerie stood still. This was the thing she'd learned about her gift. She didn't have to move to use it. She placed her awareness inside the crystal compression field and felt its architecture the way she could feel the stress points in a wall. And she found the thing she was looking for, the resonance frequency, the precise vibration at which the field would not shatter, that would harm Lanka, but would simply release. Cease to want to compress. She hummed. It was a song her grandmother sang on the front stoop in the evenings. She didn't know why it was that song specifically. It had the right frequency, she supposed. Or maybe some things just work better when you're not overthinking them. The field dissolved. Lanka, freed, used powers that none of them had seen her use before. Something involving light, specifically the amplified and redirected kind, and the lavender-wigged agent went down in a heap of scorch robes in genuine surprise. The figure behind the desk raised the skull staff, and Aeri was already moving, already inside the frequency of the device, already knowing the note it didn't want to hear. She whistled, sharp and short, and the staff sparked once and went dark. Su Chan, freed from the pole, immediately ran at the nearest monster with the pure committed panic of someone whose instinct was not flight, but something angrier, and this proved, against all probability, reasonably effective. They got out, Doctor. Bang Deok was waiting outside with a device he had built from cave-salvaged alien components and 2 car batteries and was crying somewhat into it, which he said was just the solder fumes, but was obviously not just the solder fumes. "Does it work?" Ari asked. "I have no idea," he said, wiping his eyes. "I've been testing it for 4 hours and I cried every time." "That might be the fumes," Daysek said charitably. "It might be," Dr. Bang Deok agreed, in a tone that suggested he knew perfectly well it wasn't. The device was a signal amplifier. It could take the resonance frequency that Aeri had found in the compression field and broadcast it wide enough to disrupt the Dominion's advanced formation at range. A defensive weapon. Maybe the difference, Dr. Bang Deok thought, between an invasion that succeeded slowly and one that was interrupted at its earliest stage. Lanka looked at the device for a long time. Then she looked at Dr. Bang Deok. Her 4 eyes did the thing they did when she was moved, the lower 2 blinking rapidly, the upper 2 going very still. "You built this," she said, crying. "Technically, I built this and then cried," he said, though there was some overlap. "On my world," Lanka said, "we have a word for those who make things while mourning. It means something like, the ones who build anyway." Dr. Bang Deok blew his nose on his sleeve. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." The Dominion scout that arrived the following week was different. The circus agents had been scouts, disruptors, the kind of force sent ahead to weaken and confuse and report back. This was something else. It came in a vessel the size of a house that landed in the hills at 3 in the morning, with a bass thud that they all felt in their chests and that woke half the town. It deployed 3 units, each the size of a small vehicle, heavily armored, moving with the measured efficiency of things that had done this many times before on many different worlds. They found the cave easily. The Guardian's amber light, still faintly glowing, was apparently visible on frequencies the Dominion's instruments used. The Guardian was on its feet. None of them had seen it stand since the crash. The fracture lines were still there, the amber glow still diminished, the structural damage still extensive. But it was standing, and its height, 2.5 meters, the plates and angles of its body catching the cave light, was, in the context of the moment, immense. It raised one hand. The lead Dominion unit stopped. The Guardian said something, not in Korean, in something older and more formal, something that pressed against the walls of the cave and made the stalactites ring faintly. Lanka's expression, watching from the side, was not quite grief and not quite pride. Something between them. Something that required standing very straight to contain. "What is it saying?" Junho asked, low. Lanka was quiet for a moment. "It is saying that this world is claimed, that it stands under protection, that if the Dominion proceeds, it proceeds not as a force meeting an empty world, but as an aggressor meeting those who will not yield." A pause. "It is saying their names," Lanka added. "All 4 of them, as the protected, as the ones under its charge." The Dominion unit did not stop for long, but it stopped. For 3 seconds. Aeri counted. It stopped, and the Guardian stood there in its damaged, diminished, ancient body, and the cave rang with something that was not sound, but felt like sound. The shape of a claim being staked in the deep language of the galaxy. Then the unit advanced, and the fight began. It is difficult to describe the fight without describing the 4 of them as they were in it, which requires acknowledging something that is uncomfortable to admit about human children who have been given extraordinary gifts. They were afraid, and they fought anyway, and these 2 facts were not in tension, but were the same fact stated from different directions. Junho fought the way he'd always done everything, forward, personally, as if each challenge were aimed at him specifically and required a response in kind. His air pulses had gotten stronger and more precise over the weeks. He could now hit a target the size of a fist from 40 meters. And he used this with a focused aggression that pushed the lead unit back through 3 cave chambers before it recalibrated. Dae-Sik fought the way he thought, which was sideways. While the units were tracking Junho, he was rearranging the cave floor, opening fissures, closing corridors, softening the ground in front of advancing machinery so it sank and labored and lost momentum. He was humming while he did it, some pop song he was obsessed with completely unconsciously, and Su-chan, who had come back, which said something about Su-chan, was yelling at him to focus, and Dae-Suk kept saying, "I am focused, I'm just also humming." Lanka was directing. She had, it turned out, strategic experience that none of them had. She had been, before whatever had made her flee, something more than a princess in the ceremonial sense. Something more like a field commander who had happened to be born into a royal house. She moved through the chaos with a calm that was not detachment but precision, telling each of them in rapid Korean where to be and when, her 4 eyes tracking the whole space simultaneously in a way no human eye could. And Aerie was everywhere her brothers were not. She found the stress points in the unit's armor. She found the resonance frequency of their propulsion systems, different from the compression field, but operating on the same principle, the same Dominion design language. And she broadcast it on Dr. Bang Diok's amplifier, which she had strapped to her back, and she turned the dial to the frequency she had mapped, and she hummed her grandmother's song again, low and steady under the noise of the fight. And the lead unit's propulsion system stuttered, then stopped. The unit was not destroyed. It was not defeated in any dramatic, spectacular sense. It simply ceased to move forward. It stood in the cave, and its lights dimmed, and it was still capable of many things, but not of advancing, not of reaching the Guardian, not of transmitting the coordinates that would tell the Dominion fleet that this particular small blue rock was worth burning. 2.3 seconds of silence. Junho broke it by saying, "Did that work?" in a tone that suggested he couldn't quite believe it. "Yes," Aerie said. "How?" She considered how to explain the intuition of structural resonance to her 16-year-old brother in a collapsing cave with 2 other units still operational. "The same reason a soprano can break a glass," she said. "Everything has a frequency at which it doesn't want to hold together anymore." The other 2 units retreated. Not fled, retreated in the ordered, calibrated way of things that were reporting rather than running. They would go back to the vessel. They would transmit information. The Dominion would know this world existed now, would know it was occupied by something that had pushed back. But they had bought time. Weeks, Lanka said. Possibly months. The Dominion was methodical. It would assess before it escalated. And in the space of that assessment, there was the possibility of something more. Communication, coalition, the slow work of making contact with the other races the Dominion had not yet reached, the ones who might be persuaded to stand together. "If you leave," Aerie said to Lanka that night, sitting again at the cave entrance, the valley lights below them, the stars very clear after the rain, "will you come back?" Lanka looked at the sky for a long time. The crack in her shoulder had faded over the months, not healed exactly, but incorporated, become part of her structure, glowing amber and steady as a navigational light. "I will send others," she said. "Others who need to understand what is here." "And what is here?" Aerie asked. Lanka looked at her, all 4 eyes, present and focused. "A world that has not yet learned it is extraordinary," she said, "which is, in my experience, the most dangerous kind." The Guardian's light steadied to a constant amber the morning Lanka left. She went at dawn, slipping out of the cave with the noiselessness of someone who has spent months learning the acoustic properties of a space and knows exactly where to step. The pod, repaired for the 3rd time by Dr. Bang Diok, who had by this point stopped pretending the repairs were temporary and built them to last, was ready. She had left a small object on the cave floor beside the Guardian, a chip of something crystalline, pulsing very faintly at a frequency Aerie could feel from across the room. A way to call. A way to be called. The 4 children and the doctor stood outside and watched the pod go, a bright point climbing fast and then faster, thinning to a streak, then gone. Su-chan was trying not to be visibly moved and failing. Dae-Sik was not trying at all and just crying openly, which he defended as appropriate to the situation. Junho had his jaw set and his eyes squinted in the direction she'd gone, the way he looked when he was personally aggrieved by a situation he couldn't argue with. Dr. Bank Diok was crying into a cup of instant coffee, which he claimed was because the coffee was very emotional coffee. Aerie held the crystalline chip in her palm and felt its resonance. Steady, structured, purposeful, like a tuning fork. like something that would wait for however long it needed to wait. She thought about what Lanka had said. A world that has not yet learned it is extraordinary. She looked at her brothers and Su Chan and the rumpled, weeping doctor at the cave mouth and the hills and the valley below, where people were already starting their morning routines, farmers and shopkeepers, and parents feeding children who had no idea what had moved through the hills above them these past months. She thought about the Dominion, methodical, patient, moving through the galaxy toward the next world on its list. She thought about frequency. About everything having a threshold at which it would not hold together, she thought. We have been practicing. The chip pulsed once in her palm, warm as a coal. She closed her fingers around it. 2 years later, when the Dominion's second approach made contact in the outer system, a full assessment fleet this time, 7 vessels, methodical as promised. The signal that went out from the third planet of this unremarkable star system was not a weapon, not a declaration of war, not a plea. It was a frequency. Ari had spent 26 months mapping it, refining it, learning the deep grammar of the Dominion's design language, the way she'd learned the stress points in the cave wall, the crystal field, the propulsion units. She understood now that the Dominion's entire fleet architecture operated on a coherent, resonant principle, a single vast system of interlocking frequencies that made it efficient, coordinated, unstoppable. Unstoppable until you knew the note it didn't want to hear, the signal she broadcast on Dr. Buying Diok's amplifier, now upgraded to planetary scale, the two of them having spent the better part of a year in the cave working on it, him building and crying, her mapping and testing and humming bits of her grandmother's song while she worked, hit the fleet's coherence frequency at 4:47 in the morning, local time. What happened next was not dramatic in the visual sense. 7 vessels did not explode. There was no light show. There was simply, across the fleet, a cascade of systems dropping out of coordination. Navigation, communication, the interlocking matrices that allowed a Dominion fleet to function as one organism rather than 7 individual ships. They could still move, they could not move together, and a fleet that could not move together was not, in any meaningful sense, a fleet. Junho was on the hill above the cave with a pair of binoculars, tracking the point of sky where the fleet was. He watched the lights go from coordinated to scattered, saw the formation break, saw the reassessment begin. Beside him, Day-Seek sat cross-legged on the stone with his palms flat on the ground, feeling the deep vibration of the planet beneath him, the slow, reassuring heartbeat of a world that was still intact and intended to stay that way. Su-Chan stood a little apart from them both with his arms folded, watching the sky with an expression that had changed considerably over 2 years. From a kid who'd stumbled into something terrifying to someone who'd made a choice about it and stuck with it, and worn that choice into his face. They're turning, Junho said. I know, Ari said. How long will it last? Long enough. She paused. We should call Lanka. Junho lowered the binoculars. He looked at his sister. 13 now, taller, the crystalline chip worn on a cord around her neck where it pulsed steady amber. He thought about the cave and the Guardian and the circus tent and the compression field, and the fact that when the Guardian had pressed its hand to each of their chests 2 years ago, it had not given them power exactly, but had recognized something that was already there and said, "This is sufficient. This is what is needed." He had not understood at 16 what that meant. He understood it better now. Not perfectly, but better. He thought about the frequency at which things chose not to fall apart. Yeah, he said. Call Lanka. Iri closed her hand around the chip, felt its warmth, felt the structure of it. Patient, purposeful, waiting, and pressed it to her throat and hummed. The signal went out across 17 light years in the particular frequency of something being claimed and protected and refused. In the cave below, the Guardian's amber light brightened. Above them, the stars were very clear, and somewhere in the direction Lanka had gone, something turned toward the signal, recognized it, and began the long journey home. The Dominion fleet held its position for 49 hours. Then it withdrew. Not forever. The Dominion was patient and methodical, and had a memory longer than most civilizations. But for now, and for now was what they had, and they had earned it, which was different from having it handed to them, and different in a way that mattered. Ari sat on the hill in the early morning, with the chip warm against her collarbone and the amplifier quiet in its straps and the song still moving through her, quiet as breathing. Below in the cave, the Guardian's light held steady. Beside her, her brothers were arguing about something small and inconsequential, the way they always did after things got very serious, the way Humans always seem to need to do to bring the scale back down to livable, she thought. This is the thing they did not account for, not the gifts. The gifts were the guardians, not the technology. That was Dr. Bang Deok's grief and stubbornness made physical. Not even the frequency, which was Lanka's understanding, and Ri's ears, and her grandmother's song combined into something. None of those things alone would have been. They did not account for what it feels like to be 11 years old and step into a dark cave towards something crying and unknown. Because caution is one thing and curiosity is another, and you were raised by someone who said the world does not owe you the second without the first, and you decided a long time ago which one you were choosing. They did not account for a world that had not yet learned it was extraordinary, which is, in anyone's experience, the most dangerous kind.